Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsport, and it pits the 20 best drivers in the world against one another. It is marketed as for the fans, with the main goal of providing as much entertainment as possible. But this is obviously not free, and a hefty fee is now forcing fans to reconsider whether or not they're going to watch on television instead. But with the average race costing you $500 per person or up to $4,000 for a weekend pass, we need to look at why F1 has become so expensive and what you can expect an average race weekend to cost. Since the dawn of Formula One back in the 1950s, it has always been a grand affair. Even the first Grand Prix held at Silverstone was fully attended by the British royalty, while many fans were allowed in absolutely free. Through the years, the sport remains affordable, with everyone having access to the stands and some of the surrounding areas along the track. In fact, F1 would always be for the fans, especially under the Bernie Ecclestone era, which was marred by its own issues. Then, in 2017, something spectacular happened. Instead of F1 being a product of drivers and racing, media company Liberty bought over Formula One, now owning the sole rights for the production and presentation of the sport. Tickets slowly began increasing, and just a couple years later, fans who used to pay $450 for a grandstand pass would now have to reach even deeper in their pockets, paying up to $1,700 to watch the 2025 Miami Grand Prix. This doesn't even begin to cover other services, like paying up to $20 for tacos and almost $5 for a single water. Since 2017, the prices of the sport have skyrocketed, and now fans are having to spend a massive chunk of their salaries to see Max and Oscar battle it out on Sundays. But why exactly have things become so expensive? In fact, looking at a company like the WWE, which was recently acquired by TKO, you see the same problem with ticket prices. Well, it's basically a situation involving demand and supply, a factor which drives economics throughout the world. Since taking over in 2017, Liberty Media has spent a great deal of time and effort making Formula One a mainstream sport. Back when many of us started watching F1, it was a very niche type of event, and few people actually fully understood how it worked. On-field drama was few and far between, and many races would be won with pit stops. But Liberty Media and the FIA aimed to change this, launching the groundbreaking series Drive to Survive. Now, with your favourite drivers on Netflix and often speaking their minds, fans began seeing this as some sort of television series. No longer were drivers just people driving the cars, but they became human beings with an actual personality and personal lives. Back in the Schumacher era, you rarely knew who he was at home or what his personal life was like. This made it incredibly hard to resonate with the driver, but as soon as Drive to Survive became a thing, fans got a deeper insight into the driver's personality. This further solidified the likeness of these drivers, who would often create their own social media channels like Lando Norris and bring fans even deeper into their personal lives. More and more people discovered this, and Liberty managed to bring in more fans. But thanks to the drama of Drive to Survive, the purist fans were often sidelined, and drama took centre stage. This was clearly seen in the 2021 season finale, when Lewis and Max battled it out for the title in Abu Dhabi. The slow demand also came creeping in, and the FIA realised this, slowly bumping up the ticket prices each weekend. However, they still tried to have a few cheaper options, but these were still unaffordable for your average F1 fan. But the FIA itself has also tried to justify ticket prices. To better understand why the FIA has increased tickets, we need to have a deeper look at what it costs to set up a race and some of the expenses the FIA also needs to take on. First of all, you need to understand that not all ticket prices are created equally. Certain tracks will be more expensive than others. For example, a general admission ticket at Imola was only about $100, whereas the same ticket was about $350  2 weeks earlier in Miami. The FIA justifies this by saying that there is more demand for the sport in Miami, despite Imola being closer to the Ferrari factory in Maranello and having a bigger hardcore following in Italy. But since the races in the United States have now turned into what can only be described as Hollywood-produced events, with even Bruce Buffer announcing the names, this adds to the FIA costs and naturally will increase ticket prices. A smaller track like Monaco does make sense to have higher ticket prices due to the limited seating availability, and most people living in the Principality being able to watch it from their balconies. But having a track as bad as Miami be more expensive than Imola, where legendary Ayrton Senna lost his life, is ridiculous. But what many of you don't know is that the FIA doesn't set the prices for these events. It's actually the local race promoters who determine how expensive the tickets will be, and this hinges on another often forgotten element: the price to host an F1 race. Yes, the FIA doesn't just choose tracks, but rather the promoters who pay the FIA a massive amount of money who set their ticket prices to recoup these funds. Well, the hosting fee for an F1 race can be anywhere between $15 million and $50 million depending on the location. For example, Monaco doesn't pay nearly as much as Saudi Arabia, which has once been touted to have to pay up to $70 million to host a Formula One race. This is quite a big figure, and to ensure that the promoters can cover their costs, they will need to make this up through the prices they charge at the gate. But then again, one can argue that had the FIA not made it so expensive, the promoters would keep the tickets a little lower as well. Nevertheless, each promoter is also keen on making a profit, and it's these profits that'll spike the prices of tickets. So, now to answer your question of how much would it cost to visit your favourite F1 Grand Prix. For this video, we'll be looking specifically at a track like Japan, which had some of the cheapest prices following its return to the grid in 2024. The average ticket price was around $199 for the full race weekend, but this would give you access to a large section that has no specified seating and is usually along the side of the track. This will vary depending on which part of the circuit you choose. But no one ever visits a Formula One Grand Prix by themselves, so let's say that two people visiting the Japanese Grand Prix will need to pay roughly $400 just to enter the track. Moreover, this doesn't include travelling, which could be expensive depending on where you're travelling from. But since there are too many variables, we'll avoid this. Once you reach your destination and you have the tickets in hand for the weekend, you'll also need to consider a place to stay for the 4 days. Since saving money is the goal, you might want to find a backpacker's hostel, which runs you about $50 or less for the 4 days. Then it comes to food, which easily sets you back at least $15 on average per meal, but you can make this an even $20 if you want something to drink. Essentially, watching an F1 race, eating one meal per day and staying at the cheapest possible location will be close to $400 per person. This is simply just too much for the average F1 fan to pay. Now, this doesn't even begin to cover things like paddock pass, which costs upward of $10,000 at the British Grand Prix. It often means that very few people manage to enter the pit lanes or conduct those pit walks. But one thing is true, Formula One has become a very expensive sport, and watching it at home might be the better option. But what do you think? Make sure to let us know in the comments below.